So something very interesting arrived in the post today. I was not expecting it, but it arrived fairly early to my expectation. Before we begin, I just want to first cover what this watch is paying homage to. If we would say homage, it's very close to a replica, but there's one small detail that I'd like to cover that I believe makes an homage an acceptable homage and not a full-on knockoff replica. The Audemars Piguet Royal Oak is a classic design. It's an icon of watch design in the 21st century. Designed by Gerald Genta in the 1970s. It essentially saved Audemars Piguet from the quartz crisis, and it eventually became a watch that they're now, well, nowadays they're synonymous with being affiliated to. What drew me to the watch is its design, because I am an industrial designer and I really appreciate quality and finish and machining and processing, and that was the thing that really pulled me to the design. So I was very interested in the watch, but I cannot afford a 15,000+ pound steel watch, and frankly I don't see if I'd ever be interested in affording a watch of that caliber for that price. So I decided to take a different route and explore what the watch would be like to own before actually executing and buying it. And I think that's very acceptable for someone who doesn't have the means to pay for a watch of that kind but can experiment. I used to do it when I was a young kid. When I wanted to buy one of the first original Nokia cell phones, I bought the window replica of the phone that would be used for the window display, just to experiment with its features and to see its size and proportion and how it would suit me. And it was at the time when I'd ordered the real thing that was going to be coming out very soon. So I think this is acceptable. Now, regarding branding, if a company replicates the watch down to the latter and also includes the brand name and all of the specifics on the dial of the watch, I believe that is a ripoff. That's a cheap ripoff. I do believe that if a company does use the same building techniques, manufacturing techniques, but puts their brand name on the dial, I think that's acceptable for a homage piece. As long as they're not lying about who made the thing, I think that's very acceptable. So this is it. This company's called Didun Design. I found it on AliExpress. After browsing for a few days, I managed to find a very acceptable AP homage, and I was very interested in seeing how it would function and perform. So I decided to execute on buying this. And should I say that this watch only costed me £50 to buy, free shipping, free delivery, which was incredible. So this was the box that it came in. Hold on to your hats. It's pretty amazing, if I do say so. This is a very accurate representation of the Jumbo Royal Oak, 41mm representation. Now immediately, you notice how the finishing looks and how well it's been executed. Let me take it out of its case and let's just have a look in proper detail. So it came in this little pillow. I think for the purpose of space and size, I think this is perfect. It really does fill the criteria of being something that's nice and small and petite, and it shows off well. I mean, look at the bracelet. It's mind-blowing. It has a double deployment clasp, which is superb. I'll get into all the little specifics now. This is going to be an initial review, not so much a full in-depth summary. So let's have a look at the Grand Tapisserie dial. I have a feeling that it's been, I've got a cleaning cloth here to get the fingerprints off. I do tend to like micro shots. So you notice how the dial has been cut. I feel like it is a plastic dial that's been cut out and spun. Very nice little crest they've put on for the emblem. So there's no AP related emblem on the dial, which I think is very acceptable. The minute hands are very nicely colored. They are loomed. I'll do that in a future video. I'll show you what the loom is like. But the case for the finishing, it is unbelievable. So the watch measures 41mm in diameter, which is pretty large. And for someone who has 7-inch wrists, it does wear pretty large. Because of the design of the Royal Oak, you could say that if it is 41mm in case diameter, it'll wear like a 43, I would say. So for someone who has fairly big wrists or greater wrists than 7 inches, I think this is ideal for you and it'll fit very well. I will do a wrist shot very soon. The polishing is excellent. The execution has really been done well. The bracelet is the selling point, and this is what really got me hooked, is that the bracelet is spot on perfect, and the finishing is perfect. It has screw-in pins, which is fantastic, and you just unscrew and push out the pins on each side, and it has a double deployant clasp. Oh, I forgot to show you, it does have a case back, which I'll get to now. Mind-blowing. And this is all brushed, just like what the AP would be like. So my thinking is that by wearing this and trying it and experiencing what this watch is like, I can determine whether or not it's worthwhile to own the real thing in the coming years. And it's excellent. So let's get into the details. So as I said, it's 41 millimeters diameter. I would say the length from lug to lug is about 52 millimeters, so it's quite long. But the thing is that the bracelet does curve a bit more. It does not, like the real AP, these don't flex. They stay very firm in place. So it does curve a little bit over the wrist. The height of the case is about 11 millimeters, and that owes to the fact of the see-through case back. Let me just take off this sticker now, if I can, for you. Ooh, satisfying. So it has a beautiful little signed rotor. This is a Miyota, I'm not specifically sure about what the movement is, but it's a Miyota 8-0 movement of some kind. It's not a 90-15 movement, but it is, you know, if we know Miyotas well enough, they are extremely well performing movements and they are workhorses. So I'll be very interested in seeing how this holds up over the next few months. The rotor is nice and free sprung and nice and loose, which is excellent. The crown and the winding is also something really special, and it took me by a serious surprise. Let's have a listen to this. Okay, that's the crown out. The winding is extremely smooth, which is something that I did not expect, but I think it's pretty unreal. And it just screws in. It does have a bit of a wind as it screws in. The threads are also nice and long, which means that there's a nice extended wind back in, so there's a very securing feeling as you're winding it back into place. And let's have a look at the clasp itself. It's a double deployant push clasp. These two buttons are very well executed. You would just fold the one side in, this little knurled edge goes in through the hole there, and then this securing clasp goes over the top. It's insane. I cannot believe how flawlessly made this is. And seeing it in person really changes your perspective on things. I've seen a few videos on this watch recently, and seeing it in person really makes the difference. It changes your perspective a lot. The date changing is superb. The accuracy has been really good so far. I've only owned this for a couple of hours, so I'll have to let you know over the next few weeks. But I think the movement, it isn't a high beat movement. It's not 28,800 beats per minute like a 90-15 Miyota movement. It's more like 26,000. But to tell if you have a quality Miyota movement is that you listen to it and you can barely hear it ticking. It's very nice and quiet, and this is just the same. These screws are not functioning hexagonal screws that you would find on the real AP. They're just for show, but they do perform really well. The case back is secured by flathead screws, which can all be taken off, and I might take off the back of the case very soon and have a look at the movement a bit more. Now, there's one flaw that I've found on this watch so far, and I'd be interested in if you can tell what you think it is. The dial is not perfectly lined up to the center of the watch, which is a bit of a shame because everything else has been passed with flying colors. But the center of the dial is not centered perfectly in the middle. You can see that you can follow that center. It is a little bit to the left. So I might do a little bit of surgery and open it up and straighten out the dial in the future. But I cannot get enough of this bracelet, because really the bracelet is what sells this watch. And interestingly, something I wouldn't know because I have never owned or worn an AP Royal Oak itself, is that the fit of the bracelet is very different to an oyster style bracelet. It feels a lot more like a bangle almost feels like a a wooden bangle that you'd wear on your wrist as opposed to something metal, which is quite cool. So putting it on the wrist, let's have a look and see. You pull the top tab over, 1, bottom tab over, 2, and there it is. It fits very well. You can see the profile is quite interesting. I did mention that this first link does not fold over very well, so it does stand a bit proud, but it's growing on me. The size, at first I was a bit surprised at how big it felt, but the size is actually really good, and it's extremely well legible too. The company offers 3 alternatives for the steel models. You have a white dial, a blue dial, and a black dial. I went with the black dial because, as we know, black shrinks and it looks a lot smaller, and because I knew it was 41 millimeters, I knew it would be pretty big. White dial would make the watch look a lot bigger, and a blue dial would remind me too much of anti-reflective coating. So I decided instead to stick with the safe option and go with the black dial, and definitely not disappointed. This is incredible. Again, I bought this for about £50, and the manufacturing alone, I do not know how the company can afford to make these and sell them for that price, because the manufacturing quality and the tolerances behind the case and the bracelet is exceptional. Just to explain, for example, taking out these screws, there was one video that I watched recently where the guy said that screws couldn't be removed. They had a hard time removing some of the screws, but these screws were actually easier to remove than the screws on my Jeanneau, which cost me over £500 to buy. So it's quite mind-blowing. Really, really, really cool. I give huge props to the company who has supplied these, and I highly suggest, if you're interested in a Royal Oak of this kind, and experiment and feel what the watch is like before deciding to buy one, this is a very good affordable alternative that you can purchase very easily. It took about 2 to 3 weeks for this to arrive in the UK. I think it came from Singapore originally. I might be wrong, but it is pretty incredible. The watch is quite an eye-opener. So yeah, I'm going to do a follow-up review very soon and show you more about the details and explain how accurate the movement has been. And I plan to wear this quite a lot over the next few days and see how much wear and tear it can take. But thank you for tuning into this video. I hope you've enjoyed it and experienced something. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of argument in the comment section, which I totally agree and believe. This is a almost exact replica of the Royal Oak down to its very last detail. But what I do believe is good is that the company did put their own brand on the dial, which negates the idea that this is an AP. It's not trying to say that it is an AP, it's just replicating the watch down to the latter, which I think is acceptable. I mean, even down to the clasp. The clasp itself has the little shield logo on it, as well as the crown and the rotor at the back. So very good. Thank you very much for tuning in, and I'll be making a new video on this very shortly. See you in the next one.